Hi, Cara.
Hello, Vanessa.
So I've told this story before, but I've told it from a different starting point. And this is all in an effort to illustrate how our kids know more than we think they know, and they know less than we think they know. And this will make sense to you in a second. I took my youngest child, who was 11 at the time, to a comedy show. It was my brother's show, but before my brother was on, there were a series of other comedians. And one of those comedians was a man who spent 20 minutes talking about blowjobs. And I was like, oh, he's my fourth child and he's 11 years old. I didn't even think twice. Yes, he can be at a show that's talking about blowjobs. And of course, he knows what a blowjob is because all said biographical information, and based on the biographical information of my family of origin, which was my brother was teaching the whole neighborhood swear words and profane gestures from his high chair. So we go to the show, we drive back, we get to our hotel room, and we're sitting, getting ready for bed, and it hits me. I made all these assumptions about what my kid knew and didn't know. And I never asked him. Okay, cobbler's children, great. So I looked at him and I said, that guy was talking a lot about blowjobs. And I realized I wasn't sure, do you know what a blowjob is? And he looks at me and he says, not really. And I was like, oh my God, I made all these assumptions based on who he is and our family that he would know this, and he doesn't. So I then explained to him what a blowjob was. And he looked at me and he was like, oh, why would anyone want to do that or have that done to them? And I was like, right, because you're not at the age where this is stuff you should be doing or someone should be doing to you. And I'm telling you what it is so you know, but I'm not telling you because I think it's something you should be doing. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And the story is there to illustrate that there's all sorts of assumptions we make about the people we know better than anyone else in the world. The children we are raising, the people we are caring for, the people we've known, most of them since they were born, right? And we think we know everything, and we don't. And sometimes what we think we know is so much less than they actually know. And sometimes what we think they know is so much more than they actually know. And so we have to get underneath all of that so we can truly, truly help inform them.
Vanessa, I have a friend who thinks her child is the most profound genius child you've ever met in your entire life.
That friend is definitely not me.
It's not you. But I find myself, I'll be honest, some of the time I'm like, maybe that child is profoundly genius and maybe my kids are not. I also, though, most of the time land here. She is giving her 3-year-old, who then became an 8-year-old, who then became a 12-year-old, and so on and so on, so much credit for saying something that is not what the kid meant. So it is so true that we make assumptions about what they know and what they don't know. We make assumptions about the profundity of the things that they are thinking. We make assumptions about the idiocy of their decisions, right? We get it wrong in lots of different directions. And I think the thing that's hardest about caring for kids as they're in adolescence, as they travel through the tween and teen years, is that it's cognitive dissonance. They will literally, we have to hold two things to be true at once. Sometimes they know a lot, and sometimes they either don't know a lot or they take that knowledge and put it aside and they make really bad choices. And it's like you can't believe that you are managing this one human. And there's so many different ways it can and does go.
Right. And sometimes they actually are brilliant and insightful. and we sell them short.
Yes.
And we don't give them credit for it. So let's talk about a few scenarios or kind of buckets where this commonly happens. And then we can talk about how to actually figure out what kids do know and don't know and how to deliver information to them in ways that is constructive and helpful so that ultimately we can follow through on our jobs, which is to inform them and empower them to keep them healthy and safe, right? Like, let's remember that baseline. So this happens a lot with sex and porn, right? These are big, big topics. Drugs and alcohol, romantic relationships, nutrition and fad diets, right? Now kids are in a generation in the
We're
social
going to
media.
start there. We're going to start with fad diets.
Right. And I want to just talk for a second about what are the inputs kids are receiving and why does that make us assume they know more or less than they do. So in the situation of nutrition and fad diets, the inputs are often social media, TikTok, places like that, or other friends who are on those social media platforms who are getting information. So they're not just getting information, but they are getting information that may or may not be accurate, science-based, and safe.
Right.
So kids think they know things, and actually what they think they know is not true or is not safe or is not science-based. And so we're both parsing the source of their information and the accuracy of the information.
And the thing is, they're trying to do right. Let's just give them credit where credit is due. This is not true across every category, but when it comes to nutrition in particular, they are doing their best to filter all the information that's coming their way, what they think they should look like, how strong they think they should be, how thin they think they should be, how healthy they think they should be, how they can achieve those metrics, what those metrics are going to do for them, right? And I give these kids a ton of credit. They are motivated to, quote, take care of their bodies, right? But in doing so, they often make choices that are actually really, really bad for their bodies. One of your kids texts me. I know you were. One of your kids texts me not infrequently with questions about what he can put into his body. And he asks really good questions. And sometimes I'm like, oh, nope, don't do that thing. Don't do that thing. And
when he's like, Cara, can I eat 6 eggs at a time every single day?
Every day. No, should I? Or should I eat 7? And I'm like, where are we learning this? And sometimes we don't have good answers. Like, especially if I'm not a trained nutritionist. Sometimes I wish I was a trained nutritionist because there's so many fair questions that they ask, but like, really, truly, I give them a lot of credit that they're trying to do right by themselves. They really are.
Right. So if you have a kid, like I do, who you're like, this doesn't feel like a healthy thing to be doing on an ongoing basis, like eating that many eggs. The first place is you want to figure out what they know and where they're getting the information from, because that's your starting point. So in all of this, in this whole conversation, it is about finding their starting point. You cannot begin a conversation making assumptions like I did, right? I mean, most people would not necessarily assume their 11-year-old knows what a blowjob is, but in my house, that's a fair assumption. But finding out what their starting point is without judgment, right?
Okay.
Which is not an easy thing to do.
No, and as you said at the top, they know more and less than you think. So let's take nutrition. It's a perfect example. Classic question, creatine. Should I take creatine? By the way, this is not just a classic question for tween and teen boys. It has become a hot topic question for perimenopausal women to the point where I think we get more incoming about perimenopausal women at this point on creatine than we do about boys who are developing muscle. And let me just give you like my 2-second primer on creatine. Listeners who have a lot of information about creatine, I'm always looking for good resources on this. But basically, there's a lot of disagreement about how it works. So this is important to know because if you know, you know, but no one really knows with creatine.
Mhm.
Okay. So there are lots of podcasts, lots of research papers. There's lots of science around creatine. But at the end of the day, no one has said definitively, does creatine actually build muscle or does it just hydrate muscle? Does it make muscle look bigger because muscle can take in more water? Or does it actually impact the size and function of muscle? Again, if you have information based in science, we'd love to know. But I mean, I will out one of your kids right now, Vanessa, because I don't think he would mind. He has asked me about creatine for years. My own son has asked me about creatine for years. Last year, when my son was a senior in high school, we were at the championships for his sport and we were sitting and like before the final race and every parent around the table was asking about their kids' desire to be taking creatine. And when you stop and ask these kids what they know, I will tell you some number of them are encyclopedic. It's incredible. They have listened to Huberman. They have read every study they can. They have sourced their creatine and they are sure that what they are getting is right. They are getting their labs checked. They're doing whatever. Like they are. And yet they know more and less than you think.
Well, and it's funny because when I was with our pediatrician with one of my boys and he brought up supplements, also credit to him, he also brought up gambling and sports betting, which I really appreciated. He said, I don't want you taking supplements. I don't want you taking creatine. And I said to him, can you explain the research and the data behind that statement so he knows? And he said, we don't have good research or data, but after 30 years of being a pediatrician, I'm telling you, until I have more information, research and data, I don't want you taking it.
And I will just because there's going to be someone who asks for my kid's going to need more, so give me more. Here's the more that you can give your kid. Not only do we not know exactly how creatine works or what its long-term impacts are, but we also don't know what else is packed into all of these supplements. We don't know what heavy metals are in these unregulated substances. We don't know what other additives are in there. We don't know how much sugar or sugar substitute is in there. We don't know. So like, it's not just about the active ingredient. It's about everything that's in there and now multiply it across all of these different supplements, across all these protein powders, across all this stuff. It's why pediatricians and nutritionists generally land on whole foods better than processed foods, and eating a mineral or a vitamin in a food is better than taking it as a pill. But it's all a long way around. They know more and less than you think, because I can sit at the dinner table with your child, and Vanessa, I have. And he, for a long time, knew more about creatine than I did. Like he really knew. And he knew the side effects and he knew what to look out for and he knew what to worry about. But he was so laser focused on that one supplement because he really wanted to know the benefits of muscle building that he was incapable, like all people, not all, but vast majority of people his age, of pulling the lens back and thinking about the bigger picture. And those were the interesting conversations. Right?
Right. Because you want to give them credit for doing a deep dive and doing their research and finding their sources. And also you have to gently let them know. Now, sometimes as parents and trusted adults, we're not so gentle and we're like, oh, well, that's a load of BS. And it's tempting to do that because we're afraid of where our kids are getting information from. But also, if we shut down these sources of information without doing it in an inquisitive and sort of curious way, they may be less likely to sit at the dinner table with us next time and share what they learned or talk to us about it.
Right. And I want to add one other piece that factors into how much they know and how much we know, which is learned and lived experience. So I'm going to use a different supplement. I'm going to go with ashwagandha now, another male favorite. So ashwagandha, guys who are looking to bodybuild will often talk about taking ashwagandha along with creatine, or before they even start creatine, a lot of them will want to take ashwagandha. And there are lots of guys out there who take this supplement, and there are lots of guys out there who develop acne, a lot of acne. And as they develop their acne and they're taking their ashwagandha, they land at this moment, this intersection of, is it the ashwagandha that is causing my acne? And some of them determine that they know the answer. Yes, it is. They're not doing science. They're not looking at cause and effect. They don't know. Maybe they would have gotten their acne anyhow. Maybe they wouldn't have, but they are certain that their ashwagandha was caused by their acne. There are other kids who come to the opposite conclusion. I challenge you to eavesdrop on a conversation among teen boys about ashwagandha and acne, because it's really, really interesting. They are certain, those who have had acne with ashwagandha, that it is causative, and those who haven't, that it's not. It's a really good reminder that our lived experience informs what we quote unquote know. And beyond that, that sometimes when we finally get science, and I will look up the science on ashwagandha and acne, Vanessa, because I don't have the answer to the question you're about to ask me, which is it causal? But sometimes if you get the science or the data or the information that's unbiased, if you get that information and you present it to a kid, their lived experience runs so counter to what that information is that they will reject it. So it becomes a very emotional thing. So in fueling these conversations where sometimes they're presenting like they know everything about something, you also have to remember that there's an emotional undercurrent to a lot of what is informing them. And it's totally fair.
And that they want to feel like the experts in some parts of their lives. We have to give kids an opportunity, even if they're not right in this particular thing. That kid is saying to you, I want to be seen as an expert in something. And, if they're not quite getting it right on that thing, find some other places in their lives where they are expert, where they can teach you, even if you're debunking this particular assertion. An area where I think we need to be more assertively, I don't want to say instructive, because you'll understand in a second why I don't want to use that word, but where we want to be much more proactive in giving our kids information, not just finding out their starting point, is in the area of sex and porn, and how porn is affecting kids' understanding of sex. So nutrition and supplements, it's quite clear that kids are getting a ton of information from social media platforms, from all sorts of media. I mean, listen, kids are watching documentaries now in a way that we never watched documentaries when we were teenagers. But thanks to streaming platforms, they have access to all sorts of specialized documentaries.
Also, documentaries are just better.
Oh, I really don't like watching documentaries. But when it comes to like porn and sex, where are they getting their information? Yeah, they might get sex ed in school. Yeah, you might be teaching them about sex at home. They're also being exposed to porn, or their friends are being exposed to porn and sharing what information they glean. And in that case, it is really about safety in many situations. And this is also true of substances, which we'll get to in a second. I mean, porn is writing the narrative for kids about what sex looks like. And the scariest part about that is that the sex in porn is violent, right? Like, we did a whole episode on rough sex and how porn is informing the mores of young people's sex lives. Debbie Herbenek from Indiana University came on to talk about her research. And it's like, choking is like a normative part of young people's sex now. I mean, the whole thing makes me really, really worried for them. And so, our kid is not going to march up to us and say, hey, so I was having sex with this person, or, oh, so a friend of mine told me they were watching some porn and the person was choking. They're not going to share that information, right? We're not we're getting to the stage in life. Maybe if like a younger kid gets exposed by someone on the bus and they're like, oh my God, you're not going to believe what I see. But more often than not, we're going to have a general sense of kind of what they may be hearing or learning or not. And it's our job to sort of get to the bottom of things in a way that's weirdly less specific, but actually more important.
Right. And when you put the framing of they know more and less than you think on top of this exact conversation, there are two sort of big things that we need to talk about. One is they may know less than we think they know or need to know about sex and porn and things like that. But the other is they may be exposed to more or doing more or engaging with more. And because of the shame involved certainly with porn viewing, because I don't know a ton of adults who approach it with their kids in a way that, is like, yeah, great. I'm super excited that you're watching porn. Let's talk about it at any time, right? Because it's terrifying to us as adults, what we know kids are seeing. And then the kids instantly feel judged and feel shame. But if they're seeing more and their knowledge is actually greater than we realize, their lived experience is greater because they don't want to talk about it with us because they know porn is bad in our mind, but it's everywhere and it's titillating and it's a click away and that puts us all in a really complicated position. I think when it comes to sex in general and porn in particular, kids will tell their trusted adults what they think they want to hear as the first shot across the bow. Your goal is to get past that and get into what they really know or don't know and what they really have seen or haven't seen so you can help them out. I mean, that's the beauty of the story that you tell about having a kid who was, consuming this content that was, above his head and a little bit out of his league. He told you, he told you, which means you have gotten past that point of needing to interview him for what's your knowledge base, right?
Right. But also he was young enough that he was going to honestly answer me. Give him a year or two and I might not have gotten such an honest answer.
That is so true.
And so let's use porn as an example, right? You listen to this podcast, the average age of porn exposure for kids in this country is 12 years old. You know that 15% of 10-year-olds have seen it. And so you're like, okay, I got to have the porn conversation. But if you start out with have you ever seen porn? You're not going to get an honest answer because a kid knows they're not supposed to be watching it, or if someone showed it to them, that person wasn't supposed to show it to them. So we have to get out of the litigation mode of like, have you or haven't you? Who showed it to you? What did you see? Because it just shuts down conversation,
Right.
Even though that's what we desperately want to know. It's actually not what we should be asking. And my favorite thing about talking to parents about porn is that when you say to them, like, just start with a simple question. Hey, do you know what the word porn is? Have you ever heard the word pornography? And they're so relieved, like parents are so relieved, like, oh, that's all I have to say. And then a kid will say, oh yeah. And you say, oh, well, like, describe it to me. Would you know what it is? And then when they're stuck with the job of defining it, it becomes harder. And they're like, oh, well, I know it's like bad or it has to do with sex. But all of a sudden you start to get a point. When I had that conversation with one of my kids and they were like, yeah, well, the thing that I know about is like, I know some people talk about this website called Pornhub. And I was like, ding, ding, there's my starting point, right? Someone has told them about a website. I know it's in the water. I know it's in the vernacular. Yeah. My kid may or may not have been that kid who knows about a site called Pornhub. Not my job right now to figure out if they were the one who told their 3 friends about it. All I know is they know there's a place to go to access porn. They know what that site is called.
So Vanessa, sometimes kids, especially teenagers who are a little bit older and have a higher guardrail up, those kids, I mean, not for themselves, but for us, those kids may answer by saying, yeah. Do you know what porn is? Yeah.
Right.
Right? Okay. Tell me, mom. And it feels like a conversation ender, but I think it's an opportunity to assess, again, in the framing of this whole podcast, what do they know? Right? And you decide, you can pick when you gauge it. I like, when I was seeing kids in the office as the pediatrician, it's super easy because you're not the parent.
Right.
Right. It's really easy to be the third party and to ask them. And the response when they're like, yeah, is great. Do you want to share with me what you know, or do you want me to describe to you what counts as porn? Like, we could do it either way. Right. It's not a yes, no, right? It's a pick your path. There are lots of ways through that conversation as kids get older and they start to shut it down in a really real way. It is amazing. You point at the difference between 11 and 12. There was an article that came out a week or two ago. You and I have talked on this podcast forever about this switch that goes off in the brain when a kid turns 12 and it's like suddenly the friends matter and the parents don't. It's like this magical switch. There is a magical switch. There is science that now shows that the part of the brain that is lit up with neurotransmitters literally shifts at the age of 12. And when you hear maternal voice, they didn't really measure paternal voice, but when you hear maternal voice, what used to light up at 12, literally no longer lights up there. It lights up somewhere else in like a sidebar
in
area.
Siberia.
Yes. And what literally that maternal voice trigger is replaced by pure voice. It is unbelievable. And so what is happening inside their heads is then playing out in your conversations. And it gets really hard to gauge what they know and what they don't know when talking to you about some of these topics is really not lighting up their brain at all in any meaningful way. And so gauging what they know may sound like, hey, either I got to hear it from you or you got to hear it from me. You choose which way.
Right. It's not necessarily going to be this like beautiful 4-hour conversation. It may just be some information.
That's right.
And that's fine. Another way to kind of gauge what's in the air is to say, you know what? Are people talking about fentanyl at school? Like, I'm just wondering kind of what you guys are talking about. What are your teachers talking about? Right. So when we think about drugs and alcohol, the temptation is to want to know exactly what our kid has seen or done or learned about. But when we get super frontal in our interrogation, we actually are less likely to learn what they know and don't know than if we keep it broader and less directed. And it's a fascinating thing about kids because they can sniff it out, right? When we're like desperately trying to get information from them. As you said earlier, Cara, they're so good at shutting it down. But they're a lot more willing to kind of generally share about stuff than we give them credit for. And sometimes that's because somebody did something funny in the class where they were talking about drugs and alcohol, or more often than that, some teacher or educator that came in from the outside was like super boring and they hated it, but they did learn this one thing that I guess they'll share. Or some kid got in trouble at school for having a substance or doing something on the weekend that got, turned up at school. So when you're not asking them directly about their experience, it's often the time when you learn most about their experience. And it seems counterintuitive, but I promise you it works. And I would love the brain study on that one, Cara.
So Vanessa, it is so true that these conversations evolve. One of the things that never ceases to amaze me is the ongoing willingness, in fact, the increasing willingness over time for kids to engage in a conversation once you're over that first hurdle. So it feels like to get to the core of what do they know, what don't they know, and what do they need to know, that's sort of the hardest part. It's the icebreaker. You got to get over the first hurdle, right? And then what you've done is you've established that you're willing to go there. And if you establish that you're willing to go there in a non-judgmental way, or if you've taken a do-over, because maybe you were judgmental the first time, but you try again, generally speaking, what will happen with these conversations is that kids will circle back and circle back and circle back. And it happens slowly over time, but drugs and alcohol are an area that I find particularly interesting. Drugs, especially, are ever evolving, right? The names of street drugs are changing. The access of prescription drugs is changing. The way people use different substances is changing. Legalization is shifting. And kids actually want to be in conversation about it. They want to understand a little bit about, as they get closer and closer and then cross legality lines or a substance that will never be legal, they sort of want to test out how these substances that they heard when they were very little were bad, bad, bad with capital B, capital A, capital D are suddenly okay for them because they've hit a certain age, or are okay in moderation, or okay because they're prescribed for them. And they're trying to make sense of all this information. I find that when it comes to drugs in particular, kids will often bring up the topic more often than any of these other tricky topics. And they'll do it, again, as you said, because it's not about them. I have a friend who, I know someone that, right? And it's a really great, take that opening into that conversation.
And I would say substances are an area where I do a lot of sending Instagram posts and reels. I do a lot of, we still get the weekend newspaper hard copy. I do a lot of leaving articles out on the kitchen counter. I do a lot of texting articles and news. This is a place where it's like little droplets of information over time. While kids are still home, living under your roof, you get one sense of what's going on. One of the things I like to do, and luckily my children are not going to listen to this podcast episode, so I will share this here with you all, is my kids are in charge of dinner cleanup. I like to help and make sure, get things moving, and then I will leave the room, but stay sort of within earshot. And they put music on, and all of a sudden the conversation shifts. The minute I am out of the room, all of a sudden they're talking about things and sharing things. And I'm still visible. They know I'm not tiptoeing around and eavesdropping around a corner. They know I'm there, but I'm not standing right there with them. And they will talk about things and share things with each other that helps give me an insight into what their reality is. And sometimes it's about substances, but I'm playing a very long game educating my kids about substances. It is constant. It's like one of those things that I never stop sharing information with them. But if I had only one huge talk, it would be much less effective. And it's a really effective place to be like, hey, I'm just wondering what's the latest? Because it's new to me and things have changed so much. It's a place where we can really be dumb parents and not understand their reality. And again, this is a moment where they can be, quote, expert because they are the experts in their experiences. And if you play the role of teach me, they'll share a lot more than hey, I know what the truth is. And and then they look at you like, give me a break. And
you don't have to be perfect. I mean, my kids will sometimes share things about what people put into their bodies. And I'm like, what? Not what that horrible person. I'm just I cannot wrap my brain around that sentence that just came out of your mouth. And it's been very interesting because their reaction, and it's again, truly not delivered to judgment. Their reaction is often I know. And they want to talk about it. They want to process what they've seen or more often heard. Because remember, with a lot of this, it's about story value, right? And it's about social cred until it's not social cred, or it's social cred until there's disaster. There's just so much richness to this idea that, in a lot of these conversations about all these topics we're covering, they will know a lot less than they lead us to believe. In this one arena, they are generally the experts. They certainly know what is popular and what is not in terms of substances of abuse in the local neighborhood and the city and wherever you are. So super interesting to continually circle back to sort of gauging what they know, what they can teach you. But I mean, good luck, do your best. No judgment is really the way to do it, but it's hard. It's hard.
So the last place that we'll go where it's good luck, they'll teach you it's hard, is when it comes to romantic relationships and the sort of vocabulary and mores around romantic relationships. And I want to start here, actually. We've talked a lot about kind of older kids, but when we think about younger kids, when we think about fifth and sixth and seventh graders, and they find relationships where they are really, really connected to another person and they really care about that other person. And we think, oh, what do they know? They're 10, 11, 12, 13. We dismiss it. And I just want to remind people that kids that age are immensely capable of deep love and affection for another person. Doesn't mean they're going to marry them. It certainly doesn't mean they're going to go run off and have sex with that person at those young ages. But it does mean that they are exploring what it looks and feels like to be really connected to another person. And so in this case, we assume kids know less, that they can't possibly know what it feels like to really love and care about someone else. And just remember those years for you. Remember those feelings, remember those connected relationships. So that's the kind of, they know more than you think. Another place they know maybe more than you think, although maybe everyone is confused, is the vernacular around romantic relationships, right? So we did a couple of episodes about teen love, one from the perspective of Ask Elle from TikTok, the other from the perspective of Lisa Phillips, who wrote a book about first love and heartbreak. And it gets at how confusing the landscape is these days. The terminology like situationships and hookup culture and talking, which is not talking, right? The landscape is very, very confusing. And the terminology kind of means different things to different people. It certainly means different things to us than it does to the kids. And this is a place where it feels really confusing. And we assume they know because it's their reality. But if you get underneath all the lingo they use and you're like, well, what does a situationship mean? Or what does exclusive mean? You find out they're actually not entirely sure what their reality means.
Yeah. Although I will say that I feel like the pendulum is starting to come back a little bit more. Over the years, I've been sort of impressed, I would say, is the gentlest word, with how much kids have pushed back against relationship, only to discover over and over and over again how many kids are in committed exclusive relationships, do want to call themselves dating, do want to go through these rituals that we went through a generation ago and experienced in a very organized fashion. And there was a moment where it felt like every kid I asked rejected it full sail and only wanted a situationship. And then it does feel like almost to each his own now. There's a real collage of experiences. And what I like about what I see today is that I think there's real acceptance. I think kids who want to be in relationships are accepted by their peers as great. That's great. That's not atypical. And kids who don't are accepted by their peers and they're like, great. That's great. All good. You do you. It gives everyone permission to figure out what they want for themselves, which if we live in one extreme or the other, you can't really figure out what you want. If relationships are off the table, because that's not what your generation does, then to want a relationship feels very outsiderish. And so I think there's this, I mean, maybe it's just the bubble of kids that we talk to who are kids who are more open about talking about all this stuff. It's very possible. But my sense is that we've moved a little bit back towards there's a smattering of everything in any given community or group of kids.
Yeah. And I think the role for us is actually, we can't control the mores, and it's, things ebb and flow as they did when we were kids and our parents were kids and so on and so forth. But we can remind them of what we hope for them to have someday. And that may not mean getting married. That may not mean having children. I actually avoid using those goalposts in my own family because people are making all sorts of different relationships in their lives. But I do talk about love, and I do talk about commitment, and I do talk about caretaking, and I do talk about consistency and loyalty and respect and devotion. And so whatever form their relationships ultimately take, I want my kids to know that they can demand that of the people they're with, and they owe that to the people they're with. And again, it's like, whatever their starting point is, whatever they do know, whatever they are doing in their relationships or not doing, if that is a reminder to them that it all comes down to human connection, and however they choose to be connected to another person, that they should have those things as baseline. And that, sometimes kids come to us, Cara, a lot of times kids come to us and they're worried about their friends' relationship. They're worried about the health. Kids know so much these days about healthy relationships and toxicity and controlling behavior and things we never talked about. I mean, you and I did a whole episode on what we wish we'd known about healthy relationships. Kids these days, on the one hand, have an entire lexicon of healthy relationships, and on the other hand, aren't sure how to pick up a phone and call someone and make a plan to go to the movies. And so they know so much more than we think they do. And in some ways, they know so much less. And so it's about being in conversation with them in ways that make space for that whole experience. That's so critical.
And likewise, some of them know how to balance friendships and romantic relationships. And I would say there's an entire episode to be done, Vanessa, about how to help kids through when they do one really well, but they've left the other to go fallow, right? I mean, they just don't feed and water that side. And it's particularly true of kids who have deep romantic connections, and they're very, I've seen this over and over where kids, I mean, they're really having extraordinarily emotionally mature relationships in the adolescent years when they're teenagers, in their early 20s, but they get disconnected from their peers because they don't know how to find balance and they don't understand what doesn't feel right for them. So there's a lot to be said there. That is something, again, they know more than we think in terms of their ability to have lived this deep love. They know a lot less about the value of friendship when they have fed and nurtured that love and they haven't gone through the ups and downs of building friendships. I am always in awe of the kids that we meet and talk to. They teach us so much. At the end of the day, though, it's like you can have the deepest, most meaningful conversation with a kid, and then you ask them one really simple question. They're like, I don't know. And you go, oh, yeah, I forgot. You're a kid. And even though you know a lot, you know nothing, and we got to start over. And here we go. And that's the joy of the journey.
Right. I mean, they are, as Molly Colvin said, they are consistently inconsistent. And in this place, nothing is truer than what they know and what they don't know. And by the way, the kids who've read, Harry Potter when they were in second grade, there was always that kid in the class who'd read everything. There's other stuff they don't know. And so we can take comfort in our kids' strengths and their knowledge bases, but we cannot lose sight of the places where they need a little bolstering and a little extra information in ways that feel non-judgmental, have a little laugh, and when in doubt, like use a TV show or a movie to have that conversation because it's a great way. Get elbow to elbow with them. Look at what there is on their For You page on TikTok. See what they've been binging on Netflix, right? There's all sorts of ways to get a view into their realities and into their curiosities in a way that's like not intrusive and is interested and curious. And then make them watch something that you are watching these days. I've been watching Love Island with my kids. It's appalling. It's really, really appalling. But again, I want a window into their vernacular and what they're thinking about and seeing. I want to hear how they react to how people look and how they talk and how they behave and how they treat each other. So yes, I am a few times a week watching Love Island.
You want to know the best part of this conversation, Vanessa? It's that one day, maybe in the near future, maybe in the distant future, you are going to be able to turn to the kids in your life. I'm going to be able to turn to the kids in mine and say, do you remember when you thought that fill in the blank? And you are all going to fall over laughing. By the way, they can probably do the same to you.
No doubt. No doubt. I get made fun of on a very consistent basis, and I'll take it because it tells me again what their starting point is, what they've heard from me and what they haven't heard from me. When they parrot back to me my lessons, I know exactly what's gotten through and what hasn't. So I'll take it.
Vanessa, as always, you know so much.
You do too. Bye, Cara.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.